Guess who got brands talking? Brandlive.co.za.
Live from 27 Boxes, Melville. Good morning. Welcome to Breaking the Chains Recovery Radio. My name's Warren. I'd like to welcome all our listeners out there and my very special guest for today, as well as my co-host, Uncle Mannie. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Warren, or is it afternoon? Afternoon, Warren, and afternoon to our listeners. Very excited to get an opportunity to inform our listeners about the possibilities of recovery and life in general after addiction.
Well, Uncle Mannie, thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed on your own show today. Uncle Mannie, tell me a bit about yourself and your history. What took you into the deep, dark depths of addiction?
You know, I've often pondered on that question. I had no reason to actually get involved in drugs, you know. I come from a very large, loving, loyal, united family. And for me, it was peer pressure, wanting to belong, wanting to be part of a crowd. And but like with addiction, by the time I realized it was full blown, you know. So I don't have a specific reason other than life, growing up and growing pains and trying to experience different things. And the trap was set.
And Uncle Mannie, when you realized the gravity of your addiction that you spoke about and what toll it was taking on yourself and your family, what happened 16 years ago on the 1st of October 2002 that brought you into recovery?
You know, if I look back on my life, my addiction worked very differently. I spent a number of years on the street very early on in my addiction, in the first few years of my addiction. And then I then met my wife, and she was my girlfriend at the time. And we had 2 kids, and my addiction continued. I had stints in rehab. I tried giving up. I really didn't want to give up. I couldn't get the knack of living without the use of any substance. I'd substitute between drinking and drugging, and it became the norm. You know, people had accepted that that's how I am, and I think my wife had resigned herself to the fact that it's not going to change, and my kids had no option but to just live through it. And then something very funny happened. I got a brother, he's late, and he went to rehab. And I took him to rehab. And, you know, the irony of it was, I think I had a worse problem than him. But I took him to this rehab and I left him there. And then the next day, they asked me to bring him shampoo and toothpaste and his toiletries. And when I got to the rehab, my dealer was the caretaker at this rehab.
Okay.
So I had this idea, if I stick around, the drugs are going to come out. There was no way this dealer of mine would ever be sober. And he's probably a front, and he's selling drugs in the center. And 16 years ago, I'm still waiting for him to take out those drugs, you know. So I set for my first meeting on the 1st of October 2002. And I have never had the need to pick up a single mind-altering substance ever since. So in some way, I always say God had a sense of humor in that he set me up to take my brother to the center, and subsequently my brother passed on, and I'm still around in recovery, you know. So I think from the time I was born, my right name is Emmanuel. So it means God is with us. And there's a long story on that, but we'll get to that on another show. And God has been with me throughout my life. So my decision, I never had a decision in order to recover. It sort of just landed on my lap, and I held on to it, and I embraced it. And for the first time in 21 years, on that 1st of October, that fateful day, I found myself going home without going past my dealer.
Now, Uncle Mannie, firstly, well done on your 16 years. I know it's a big inspiration to me and to a lot of our listeners out there as well, I'm sure. In the last 16 years, tell us a bit about what you've done in order to maintain your sobriety and in order to help others achieve sobriety in their own lives.
Okay, I think the first realization of me falling in love with recovery was the difference it made in my family. You know, the second reason for me falling in love with recovery, I was very early, maybe a month into recovery, and there was a newcomer that I believed I could help, and I took him under my wing, and I worked with him, and I hung around with him, and we went to meetings together, and we worked our program together, and he stayed sober for a year, and then there was another guy that joined that crew, and before I knew it, we were like 15, 20, 25 of us youngsters. Because when I walked in, there were dinosaurs in the room. Guys were 30 years sober, 40 years sober, and hanging around in this crew. We were on the same mission. We wanted something better out of life. We wanted more out of life. And we made rallies, and we did fishing trips, and we just sat around and chatted recovery. And before you know it, 1 year became 2 years, and 2 years became 5 years, and and then the rest was all just allowing the spirit to flow. And they talk about the spirit of recovery, and I'm very in touch with that, and I'm very in touch with myself and who I am and what I had become and what I want to be. And the trick was to always remain teachable and move forward. We talk about marginal gains, changing a little bit every day. It's quite a lot. It's an intensive design for living that the individual, or well, I needed. I can't speak for anybody else. Where I needed to become aware of who I am and become aware of my situations and my circumstances. I had to accept a lot of things that I couldn't change, and I had to find the willingness to forge ahead and to just do what I needed to do in order to stay away from alcohol and drugs, you know. But then I discovered a little bit later it had very little to do with alcohol and drugs. It was more part of growth and self-enlightenment and self-understanding that allowed me to firstly fall in love with me and respect myself and gain my dignity and my relationships back, and everybody around me was trying to do the same thing. I knew I wanted it. I still want it, and the desire just kept growing. So when I initially started, it seemed like a mountain too high to climb, but after the experiences of, or I call it the rewards and the beauties of life, it was no longer a curse. Very early on, I think in my first year, I realized that recovery is actually a blessing, you know.
Well, Uncle Mannie, what I relate to really well is those brothers with which we need to walk hand in hand. For me, sitting here in early recovery, I guess you're a dinosaur today, but those brothers with whom we walk hand in hand are important. And I just want to thank all my brothers out there with whom I walk hand in hand. Singer, Grant, Sherwin, Ali, Kalema. I know you guys are listening. We're about to go into an ad break. If you've just tuned in, you're listening to Breaking the Chains Recovery Radio, broadcasting from 27 Boxes in Melville. We'll be right back with Uncle Mannie after the ad break.
The station with the best music. Best music.
I love the music.
Best music.
brandlife.co.za.
Lunatic, 'cause I do what I want, and I get what I want when I want it.
so ordinary. Boy meets girl, they said, "Oh, make a baby."
brandlive.co.za.
Making a bold statement yet blending into the surrounding suburbs of Melville, 27 Boxes is a realization of edgy design and practical implementation. A radical departure from the shopping malls of our generation, yet not a return to the high streets of our youth. 27 Boxes showcases the best of a shopping centre set in a garden, surrounded by the bohemian suburb that is Melville. 27 Boxes, shop, play, eat.
Good afternoon. If you've just tuned in, you're listening to Breaking the Chains Recovery Radio. And today we're speaking to my co-host and guest for the day, Uncle Mannie. Before the break, we spoke a bit about Uncle Mannie's addiction and what brought him into recovery. Uncle Mannie, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Warren.
Uncle Mannie, tell me a bit about what the positive impacts of recovery have been for yourself personally, on your community, on your family, and most importantly, on the countless others who've come into contact with you and who God has given you the ability and privilege of helping over the last 16 years.
Thank you, Warren. Thanks for reminding me. Ego can sometimes make you believe you achieve these things on your own, And there's been so many positives. I think the fact that I'm alive is positive on its own. And the fact that I'm still with my wife and my kids is amazing. We have our issues and we have ups and downs, but it's a lot less violent and a lot less robust to deal with. You must remember, I was in active addiction for the first 17 years of my marriage/divorce, remarriage, at some point in time. And, hey, Warren, just to give you an idea, my kids had become a burden. My wife had become a burden. It became a hindrance to my addiction, And people talk about a drug of choice. I would move between. That's why I say it's not about the drug. It's not substance specific. I would move from crack to heroin to Mandrax to alcohol, which, by the way, is a huge drug.
Indeed.
It was my gateway. I started off with alcohol. And sometimes people, because alcohol is legally obtainable and there's an age limit, they think, no, it's okay, And then I would do prescription meds. And so whatever gave me the effect, I would use. And then when I came into recovery, I fell in love with two things. When Nelson Mandela walked out of Paulsmoor prison, I thought I'm going to be free. We come from a country where our history cannot be ignored. And I cried, and that was most probably just emotion. The time I really felt the freedom, where I talk about catharsis, true liberation of the soul, and was on the 1st of October 2002, because if I always look at my addiction and I look at my recovery, it's almost two roads. I can choose on which road I want to travel. And they're both open, and however, there's different consequences or different rewards. And one of the things that keeps me in recovery is the light of the spirit that I find in my life when I stay in recovery, living by the principles of honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, love, tolerance, compassion. My grandfather was an altruist. He was an Anglican reverend and did a lot of good work. And I always felt I was dragging his name to the mud. And recovery presented an opportunity to start adding value, because all I ever did was I took materially, I took spiritually, I could even say I took humanity from people. I became animalistic in my thinking under addiction. And what recovery did, I think the most important thing that recovery ever gave me was my humanity. It gave me my my dignity back. It gave me an understanding that I'm not an island. And part of addiction is the selfishness and almost the self-worship where I felt I had become God. And I read a book, and in one of the books, it's by some Swami, and in one of the lines he says, "Oh Lord, teach me to be a servant of my people."
Beautiful.
And I sort of fell in love with that. And there were all these youngsters around me, and they had no direction. And I was a little bit older. I was 38, 39 years old when I came into recovery. And they looked up to me, and I liked the feeling. And I wanted to help, and I felt the more I helped, every time I helped, always say to my guys, I'm like Highlander, you know. When I'm willing to serve and I'm willing to help, I take a little bit of your soul with me, you know, and it allows my soul to heal and allows me to journey forward. And I think the highlight for me was breaking the chains 8.5 years ago. I took 2 guys off the street. They had nowhere to stay. We didn't plan to open up a rehab. Within the next week or 2, there were 12 guys. Then there were 14 guys. Then there were 18 guys. And I had to then leave my home. That was my home for 19 years. Pack my wife, pack my kids, and move into a flat so that we could allow the rehab to evolve and to grow. And to date, I know last year November, we tried to do some stats, and we had already surpassed the 11,000 mark, you know. And there was a group of guys. They're still around, 3 years clean. There were 25 of them in the center, and 19 of them are still clean, you know. And I started to look at the stats, and I started to understand, and I went into websites, and I discovered that my success rate was way above the norm and way above the standard. So the joy of recovery just started to grow. Every guy that recovered came back and gave back to the center. We gave back to the community. We gave back to families. Families started becoming whole and started becoming part and parcel of the community again. And I think that's what drives me, is the knowledge that I can visually see and feel spiritually the difference that recovery makes in one's life.
Well, from my side, Uncle Mannie, and I think on behalf of a lot of guys who've recovered at BTC, thank you. I know the success rate at BTC is way breaking the chains. For those of you out there who don't know what BTC stands for, is way above the norm. What do you believe is different at breaking the chains, and what do you believe you did differently in your own recovery? Going into that, there might be people out there might be listeners out there who are suffering from this disease of addiction, who are unable to stop using drugs. What would your message of hope and your guidance to them over air today be as to what they can do to find the same happiness, joy, and freedom which you spoke about?
You know, I think the simplicity of breaking the chains brings about a sense of gratitude and humility. I think the intention behind breaking the chains was, let me get back now to the situation we have in this country. There are about 80% of drug addicts in this country, guys on Nyaupe, guys from previously disadvantaged communities that would never be able to afford rehab in the conventional sense. And the intention was to be there for the guy that will never get a chance. And that's why Breaking the Chains was born, you know. In fact, the first 2 guys were homeless.
Sure.
And they came in. And I think the love and the tolerance, that's the code at Breaking the Chains. Blue, yellow, green, orange, doesn't matter, rich, poor, fat, thin. Well, there's not fat, many fat addicts, but it doesn't really matter, you know. If you come in there and you're willing to follow the rules and you're willing to change your life and you're willing to give back to society, then everybody's treated the same. we also have a zero tolerance on substances. We have a zero tolerance on medication. I don't really like medication. I believe that there's no chemical solution for a chemical problem, and I believe we needed to find a spiritual solution. So Breaking the Chains, in essence, is also designed as a home away from home. We allow guys to bring their own blankets, their own duvets. It's a very family-orientated atmosphere. Parents are kept in the loop all the time. As much as we love the addict, we aware of the needs of the family and what the family has been through, and we empathize with that. And jointly between the guy seeking help and the family